Welcome to the Reschool'd Podcast, the show that discusses all the things that schools may have missed, with your hosts AJ Kuti and Jason Gordon. Welcome back, everyone. I hope you're having a wonderful morning, day, evening, whichever one you're listening to. Hopefully, we will be able to add some brightness to that. As hopefully you already know, we are the Reschool'd Podcast, the show that discusses the things schools may not have prepared you for. My name is AJ, and sitting across from me again is my friend and co-host Jason. Jason, what are some things that has been taking up some of your time these days?
Well, AJ, my hobby is writing music, so I've been writing a lot of songs lately. Trying to
Are we
figure out.
talking like country, pop?
Okay, so it's primarily country. Everybody who listens to this podcast has heard my slow, twangy voice by now. But believe it or not, I put lyrics on rock songs, rap songs.
So I was going to say, is it like you lost your house, your dog, is that the kind of thing?
Yeah, but mine's more about, just had a chance to wash my truck, tailgate down, that kind of stuff.
Yeah.
The small country type
backroad
genre, the backroad stuff, right? So that's primarily where I am right now. Though I did just write one of those Caribbean cowboy songs, right? Palm trees, cold margaritas. So
that is not even in my wheelhouse. I couldn't start to write a song. I'd love to, but it's buddy. No, me, I'm working on. Well, I'm editing podcasts. I'm working on some videos. Got class stuff, family stuff. My daughter's trying to get into soccer, so that's really nice to have your one of your kids follow in your footsteps.
Absolutely,
playing the sport that you like.
Is she a goalie?
No, she doesn't really know it right now. She's young enough to still kind of getting in the mix of it. I don't think if she gets a little bit taller, she may, but she's got really good long distance running, the endurance side of it. So she may be a midfielder, maybe a defensive player.
Nice.
But, and then too, I also got to add, when we're recording this in the summer of 2021, there is the Euro going on. There is the Copa going on. And in a few weeks, we have the Gold Cup going on. So I'm living the best life right now. I watched 5 soccer games last night, or yesterday, I should say, all day. I'm loving it.
Yeah, I bet. Now, this is the time of the year for soccer. So.
Oh, man. Well, we are at the next chapter 3 of the College 101 series. First, we talked about how college works. Then we discussed choosing a major. Now in this chapter, we will be discussing the various types of class structures you may need to choose from when you register your classes. For the most part, face-to-face or in-person is probably the most common type you're going to see. And depending on where you go to college, it could be the only option that you have. But there are other possible structures, especially with the pandemic forcing a lot of these institutes to make a move towards a tech approach. So we're going to be also discussing hybrid style courses as well as online courses, both synchronous and asynchronous, and the pros and cons of each of those. So does it sound good to you, Jason?
Absolutely. I mean, we both taught all of those types of courses. So, and it's like I say,
some better than others.
Yeah, some better than others. As a matter of fact, we're teaching a combination of those courses now because we haven't gone back to full face-to-face in-person learning at our academic institution. So,
and just side note, if you're listening to this, 2-3 years in advance and you've lived under a rock and don't know what's happening in 2020, 2021, we had COVID, which is the quarantine that shut down everything. And so a lot of the colleges had to change. So when we talk about the pandemic and stuff, that's what we're referring to. Again, we don't know when you're going to be watching or listening to this. So
hopefully this stuff is timeless.
Hopefully that would be the good thing. But before we get to our quick question today, just want to remind our followers to make sure you follow us on Instagram, Twitter, LinkedIn. Our handles are Reschool'd Pod. Make sure you go to our website, reschool'd.com. You can check out what the show's about, check out the series, check out some of the other episodes that we've done. Also, you can get a look at us. You can see kind of what us middle-aged men with families and what we look like and what we're all about. Not my best picture, but we'll go with it. And also, if you like what you hear, please hit the follow button on all the podcast apps. We'd love the help. So let's get to that quick question though. Given the option of face-to-face or in-person, hybrid or online classes, which one would have fit your learning style better and ultimately lended to a better learning experience for you?
So personally, I was a face-to-face person, but that was based upon my personality type. I have strong opinions on, a different format is right for different types of people. But given that I was a high contact need person, I didn't learn necessarily much from class. It was more of a reassurance of what I had already learned. I was a big prepare for class guy. I normally did my reading. I normally made notes before.
I did not do that.
Right? So, right. But the in-person class for me, after just reading the book and getting my understanding, making my notes, thinking I have the concept under my belt when I go into the classroom, and then hearing the professor walk through it and talk about things outside of the book, me being able to ask questions, because I was that guy, I asked a lot of questions. That was incredibly beneficial to me. But that may not be very beneficial to others, right? Particularly, I'd say people who haven't prepared for class ahead of time, that are trying to learn it or get their initial exposure to it from class. Oftentimes classes, it's made to just check the learning points. So it goes through the whole chapter or all the material before you've learned even the basics of it. And that can be a little confusing. It can be a little daunting. It can also give you some false assurance that, okay, I at least have the principles down when you really don't yet. So for some people, having that recording that they can watch whenever they're ready for it and things like that, I think might be a little bit better. But what do you think?
My answer would be face-to-face. My answer would easily be face-to-face, again, because I know my style. I was somebody that needed the structure, the timeline in the class, and I needed the audio side of it. I couldn't do the learning on my own. I was not disciplined enough. I knew myself well enough. I was not disciplined enough to do an online class, especially an asynchronous online class. And so I needed that face-to-face. And if I could, all of my classes were face-to-face. Going back to what you're saying, though, hypothetically speaking, I'm going to put you on the spot real quick. You're in class, and the teacher gives you a report that you have to create, and it's due in 3 weeks. What do you do?
Well, I've been one of those people my entire life, and this is something I figured out about myself. We talk a lot about understanding career paths and how external environment meets your internal needs. Well, some of those things translate to the classroom as to about how you're motivated towards things, because a lot of that theory comes from motivation literature, right? So when someone tells me you have this to do by a timeline, I usually wait until I know I have enough time to do it, and then I do it.
So what would that time frame be like?
So if it were
let's say a 5-page paper or something like that.
A 5-page paper, I'd wait 2 days out.
Okay, so we're about the same then, because I was wondering if you were somebody that started immediately, or did you wait?
Well, it depends. So if there was something that allowed for, I was going to be proud of, a creative output, something that I was going to be able to present to the crowd. And often I got that in my literature culture classes, because you're often delivering it in Spanish, right? Yeah. In another language. And then it was the amount of research you wanted to do. So there was a huge disparity between the worst presentation or the worst done research or paper and the best one. And I took such pride in it, because in that scenario, that was just, I had to have, it was one of those scenarios that said, do as much as you can by this date. This is your cutoff. When things for me are structured like that, here, do as much as you can, and here's the cutoff, I will work diligently the entire time. So if it were framed to me like that, I always started immediately. I got into it. I did the research. I started working on my presentation skills, working on how I deliver it, to get to the point where it's not just material. Then I could start introducing personality into it, jokes, things like that. So I was an early prep person. It was out of fear, right? I needed to do that to be successful, but I was that person in undergraduate that started early.
I was a procrastinator
in most scenarios. All right, we're on opposite sides of the page there, so that's good.
No kidding. So we're going to help a whole bunch of people, hopefully. So before we get into it, let's break down each option. That way we can make sure everybody's on the same page. We kind of know what we're talking about when we say these different words or different the styles of class. So What does it mean to take a face-to-face or in-person class?
Well, generally, it's going to mean that there's a structured schedule of when classes meet, and those classes are going to meet in person. That is, the professor is going to be there, and there's some expectation that students show up. The professor may take roll and count that towards academic credit in the class. That is, it hurts you if you don't show up, or it may be voluntary attendance, but all of the lecture material is going to be delivered there in the classroom. If you miss it, you've missed part of what you paid for in that class type scenario. That's in person or face-to-face. Now, the professor might record the lectures and then post them online or post the material online later. But still, there is that expectation for either 1 day a week, 2 days a week, 3 days a week, or 5 days a week, you are going to meet physically in person in that class.
Yeah, even if it's a flipped classroom as well, it's still face-to-face.
Absolutely.
This is really the traditional, what you would think of as the traditional style of college classes. So a lot of times where you go, this is the only option that you may have.
And you brought up an interesting point. You're going to hear funny words like flipped classroom and things like that. Flipped classroom, just to define it really quickly, is generally based on the traditional classroom experience, but how you use your in-class time rather than the professor standing up there and lecturing or doing some Socratic method of questioning around the classroom. Is the professor generally uses the time to go over examples and to clarify, but not to restate the things that you should have already learned from your notes, from videos, or from something like that that was provided outside of the class.
First big word of the day, Socratic.
There you go.
So
Socrates.
Yeah, there you go.
Ask questions.
So I'll take on hybrid. Hybrid is, as you can imagine, well, maybe we should start with online, and because if we explain online, then we can explain hybrid. Does that make sense?
Right.
So I'll start with synchronous online classes. And synchronous online classes is an online structure. So everything is done online. You do not meet in person, but it has the same feel as an in-person class. So everything is structured, use time-based. You meet at a certain time, you take tests at a certain time, assignments are due at a certain time. So it is literally an in-person class, but online. You do not have to go to campus. And so there's a lot of similarities there. It's just, again, the tech side of it. Asynchronous class, on the other hand, has no time, or very limited, or I should say, it has more flexible time. So there is no time to meet. A lot of asynchronous classes, you can think of them as, I can do it at my own pace. Some asynchronous classes has time restraints, but it's a very, large gap. So instead of taking a test between 8 and 9:30, an asynchronous class may have the test open from 8 to 8, or, open over the weekend or something like that. So there's no time structure whatsoever to it, or it has a very wide range of time structure. Hybrid, how would you explain hybrid?
Hybrid is honestly a combination of the two. Different schools approach it in different ways. The most common way that I've seen is that you have some synchronous, generally in-person component where you have to show up on this day in person at this time. Okay. But the other side of it is they may have an online portion where they do the other teaching the days that you're not in person, that you simply have an online synchronous class where you go over things the same way under any model that they teach under, but they'll deliver material or content during that scheduled time. So part of your classes are online, part of your classes are in person, but both are synchronous. Another approach to it is to take away that synchronous online, that is, this is when the online portion happens, and then you'll simply put the material out there, recorded videos, audio sessions, question and answer, online quizzes, things like that, work that you have to complete that will somehow be measured, or your attendance will be verified, or something like that, outside of those in-person class sessions. But you're basically, hybrid is a blend. Just like a hybrid car mixes gasoline or diesel engine with electric motor, here you're mixing the in-person experience with the online or otherwise asynchronous schedule.
Also, too, and I'm going to add to that, don't assume that hybrid just means 50-50 split. It doesn't necessarily mean you're going to be in the class 50%, online 50%. It could be anywhere between a 20-75 split or 75-25 split. I mean, there's a very wide range to it. And it could be, like Jason was saying, it could be that the online portion, you're doing online class, so they have the synchronous side of it, or it could be you learning at your own pace on the synchronous side and you just not coming to class. I actually taught a class prior to the pandemic that was a hybrid class, and it was an accounting information system class. And there was a very large piece of the lecture, the information side of it, where I teach you kind of going through the terms and the concepts and the topics and stuff like that. But then there was also a very small portion of the class, probably about a 25% portion of the class, that was a project. And it was a very big project. So what I did is I took days off all throughout the semester just to give the students time to do that project at their own, because it is such an integral part to the class.
That makes complete sense. Good point about the even split. It's certainly not always an even split. I taught a hybrid class last semester that I would say the split was 25% in-person activity versus I used other formats for 75%, a combination of synchronous online, combination of asynchronous online, and secondary material sources.
Well, let's get to the first, now that we've defined it, let's get to the first big question. And that is, what are some benefits of taking a face-to-face class over the other options?
So I mentioned earlier, I was the type of person who needed that, right? Being a person who is prepared ahead of time, tried to learn the material on my own. I went to class just to verify that I knew it. One thing about the online format, you don't have the opportunity at the time to interact with the professor in the same way that you do in person. Anyone who's ever communicated with somebody through the internet understands that it's a little bit different. So even if it's a live online class session, the ability to stop the professor during the lecture, to raise your hand and gain their attention, to have them clarify what they're saying is reduced online, and it starts to go away the further you get away from that in-person interaction type time period. So if you are the person who is going to interact with the professor, who is going to ask those clarifying questions, who is going to depend on that level of personal conversation, the in-person is going to be instrumental for you. I'd say that's the primary one. There are a couple of other reasons, but do you have any?
Yeah, so, and I'm going to piggyback on that. I think what you said is spot on. And I think when I read this question in our show doc and it says, what's the benefit of it? I looked as my benefit is probably going to be the same for students as it is going to be my benefit for teaching face-to-face classes. I prefer teaching face-to-face classes. It's a little bit more laborious. It's also the time necessary in class, but I prefer it because there is a level of connection that I can get with my students in class that I can't get anywhere else. And so if I'm doing a problem on the board, if somebody needs to ask a question, like you were saying, they can ask a question and I can go through it and explain it to them better, their issue that they have, not this general issue that they have, but their specific issue that they have. But even more importantly, the shy student in the back that doesn't want to ask the question, they give facial cues that I can recognize to say, hey, this person still's not getting it. And I can go through it again until I feel comfortable that they did get it. And I love that aspect of in-person classes.
Absolutely. That's a great point. I wasn't even thinking about, as professors, we can say that most professors are there for the student in ways that the student doesn't often realize. We want to help. We want our students to be successful.
Contrary to popular belief, we don't want you to fail.
Yeah, we hate giving bad grades. In our perfect world, we would love to just see excellent papers come across our desk. That is what we are looking for. But, that's not reality, right? So things that make students reluctant to reach out and say things is one thing, but the fact that in person we can look and tell when you have need and we can jump in and intervene and say, look, I think you might be confused on this. Let me clarify. We can read your faces. We can read your body cues. That makes a difference.
All right. What's one drawback from a face-to-face class?
Time. Some people just simply don't have the time to make it physically to class. Having to prepare yourself, whether that's getting dressed, traveling however far you need to travel to get there, parking, getting into the school, carrying your books if they're physically heavy, right? That type of thing. Pandemic disease, right, is a concern, right? Wearing masks and not wanting to be exposed to the virus during the current pandemic, that type of thing. All of those things go into play as an inconvenience and can make it so that your primary thought is not dedicated towards learning or acquiring knowledge at that point. It's more dedicated to, all right, now I have to do this, now I have to do this, now I have to do this. The time you spent traveling, preparing all those things could have easily been spent reading the material, making notes, that type of thing. So I would say resource availability and time.
Yeah, I don't think there's there's other ones, but I obviously think that's the biggest one. I will say, just to kind of give you another one, just to give you one more, is that if you are that student that is very shy, depending on where you go, you could be in a classroom of 300 students, or you could be in a classroom of 30. It's a lot easier to talk to a professor, ask questions in a class of 30 rather than 300. So it may be very intimidating in that face-to-face setting if you have this large kind of auditorium class of 300 plus students.
That's a great point, right? Social anxiety is real, right? Inhibitions from communication are real. And to a certain extent, if you are online and you are anonymous among a crowd, you don't have your video camera on, people can't actually see who is doing the communicating, you may be more willing to pose a question to the professor, to challenge what is being said, to give your input, because you're anonymous, that you wouldn't have done in class otherwise.
All right, give me one benefit of taking a hybrid class.
Multiple formats of learning. People learn differently, and when you blend that many techniques, you're more likely to address whatever method of learning is best for a broad array of students. You've got the element of in-class synchronous sessions where students can ask you questions. You've got the element of online elements where students can work at their own pace, however quickly they learn. And that all depends on how well you blend the hybrid course. But like I say, different learning styles require different techniques, and hybrid allows you greater flexibility in employing all of those.
And my benefit would be it gives you the ability, I look at it as it's education of education. It gives you the ability to learn how to deal with online classes at a slower rate. So like for me, again, I needed that face-to-face contact, but I also knew that at some point I want to have to do something online, or when I even get into the professional field, I have to know how to time manage myself. And so it allowed me to get my toes wet a little bit in the time management on my own, the discipline that I needed, and practice that before I just jump into the deep end and getting an online class or when I get into the workforce.
Great point. I see that in my students a good bit.
All right, what's one drawback of the hybrid class?
Once again, it will require you to learn in certain methods that may not be the most comfortable to you. That is, if there is an element where you have to learn from exercises to do on your own, or there is a requirement that you do more reading or more watching a video, some people cannot sit in front of a lecture, a recorded lecture that is, and stay awake, right? It is difficult, okay, to watch somebody on a screen where there's no interaction, it's very 2D, there's just very little that keeps you captivated in what the person's saying. So these blended methods can be harder for you, but by virtue of it being blended with the traditional format, if you are a traditional format type person, you need that interaction face-to-face, and then all of a sudden you're missing part of that, yet the expectation is that you've still learned the material to the same degree or extent. It may not work out that way. So that's a detriment.
Yeah, I can't add much to that because I think that's spot on. I think, to me, the drawbacks of a hybrid is the same thing as what a hybrid is. The drawbacks are going to be a little bit of the drawbacks from the face-to-face and a little bit of the drawbacks from the online classes, because that's what it is. And so I can't add much more than what you said. What is one benefit to taking a synchronous, not asynchronous, but synchronous online class?
Well, I would say first and foremost, If you understand the online format and you are okay with watching a video, not being there in person and using it that way, a synchronous online class means that the class still happens at those designated time periods. You still have the structure you need that I know my alarm is going to go off. I have to be in this class at this time. If there was anything to prepare ahead of time, that is to complete any homework, to do any quizzes online, or anything like that ahead of time, you still have a set timeline to do it. So for higher structure need people like yourself, right, that's going to be a big benefit. For, less so for a low structure need person like me now, because I tend to structure my own life, right? I particularly don't like other people giving me the structure. I want to make my own structure, though I am fairly structured in how I approach it. So that being said, I'd say that's my number one input on that.
Yeah, my benefit for synchronous online classes is just it gives me what I need from the face-to-face, like you said, the structure, but it gives me the flexibility of where I'm at. So I don't necessarily have to be on campus. A beautiful thing that happened during the pandemic last year in the summer is, for us, as much for students as it is for teachers, we still have to be online teaching class. I was able to teach class in a different location. I was able to teach class on a beach, which was lovely.
That does sound lovely.
But that's the same thing for a student. They can be in their, because you have a lot of international students, they can be in their home country and still be a part of the class and still have that structure that they need from a face-to-face class.
Great point. Absolutely. Certain students have different needs, and it could be extremely valuable to particularly the international student or the student with a long commute to campus.
So give me one drawback to synchronous online classes.
You have to show up at that period. So the very nature of it, again, is if you understand, if you are a structured person, you learn this stuff on your own. Going to class is just making certain that you know it. There may be time periods in your life with work, family, whatever obligations where you want to push one aspect of learning back and say, I'll cover this chapter and material a little bit later. You're still stuck to the schedule of the class. And if there is some attendance requirement, things like that, all of a sudden it's a drawback, right? You're being exposed to something before you've prepared for it. You're not getting the benefit out of it. Where perhaps if you had asynchronous, where you watch the class lecture when you were ready to, perhaps it would be more efficient for you. You wouldn't waste as much time and you get more out of that educational process.
Right. So my drawback for synchronous online classes is there is a degree of discipline that you have to have internally in order to succeed. And if you don't have that, it is super easy to fail.
True.
And even though that you have the structure of the class to say, I'm going to be online at this time. And even though you get up, your alarm clock, goes off. And I don't know how many times I've been in a synchronous online class on, our Zoom or Teams or whatever. And I have students laying in bed with their camera on because they just woke up, which is it's not a big deal to me. But the discipline to not have the distractions around you takes away from the class as well. If I'm on a class, yeah, I'll get the attendance, but if the TV's on in the background too, then I'm not paying attention. I'm not getting anything out of it. So I think to a degree, there is a level of discipline that can make or break your grade when it comes to synchronous.
Great point.
All right, give me one benefit of asynchronous online classes.
Well, it is the converse of what I said as a disadvantage of the other. I can learn this when I want to, at the pace I want to. I have students who are into a certain topic. They will learn the material all up front. And then when certain assignments are due, they'll just jump back in and refresh throughout the semester. So it allows you to structure your own schedule better. Okay? The student who is highly structured can customize their educational experience the way they want to far better than they can in person or synchronous online.
Agreed. And I would say the big thing for me is the fact that if you're what is considered a non-traditional student, it allows you to have that or gain that work experience if you have a job and still maintain your school career, your college career, because again, you're doing it at your own pace. So if you're working an 8 to 5 or 9 to 5 job, you can still take a full load of classes because you're doing it at your own pace.
Absolutely.
So that would be my benefit. What would be your drawback?
Well, once again, it's just you have to be structured. That's a risk to a student who does not have the self-discipline to set a schedule for learning, to fulfill that schedule, and then to use the class sessions and things like that the way they were meant to for assurance of learning and to further inquiries about specific things that you don't understand. It takes more effort in that regard. So if you're not structured, big risk. If you are super structured, great.
I would say my drawback is a multiple, I guess you'd say, of the drawback from the synchronous online classes, where I said to a degree the discipline can affect you. In asynchronous classes, that discipline, if you don't have it, it can affect you even worse. I mean, it's just exponentially worse because you're going to be looking and go, oh, I forgot I had a test today, or I need to take this test, or I have this, or I need to study for this, and it can back up. It could get to a point where you're having to do everything at the end of the semester because you just didn't have the discipline to schedule it out. And that's something that I struggled with. I pushed things back. Really quickly, because we're getting close to the end of the show, what are some variables a student should consider when it comes to making the best choice for which style of the class they need to take or they should take?
So I have a checklist again.
Sure.
Your personality, right? Are you high structure need, low structure need? What's your level of discipline? Resources, right? Can you get to campus, right? Do you have the ability to show up? Is it going to take away? That type of thing. Class availability. You don't want to not take a foundational class at a certain time if you know it's going to affect the other part of your schedule very negatively. So you may have to make some modifications and say, look, I'm not a hybrid class or an asynchronous online class person, but I have to do it this semester because I need that prerequisite for the following semester, or I need to be taking this at the same time. And this is all that's offered. Okay. So those are the three big things, right? Personal tendency, resource availability, and then how it blends with your other classes.
Yeah, I think it's just the motive. For me, it's the motive of taking the classes. I think it is, what are you trying to get out of it? If I was taking a class that had nothing to do with my degree, my major, it had nothing to do with, anything of importance, or at least what I saw as an importance academically from my major standpoint, then I probably would have taken it as an online because, I felt myself, I wouldn't learn really as much as I needed to in an online class. So if I took what would be considered maybe an easy A class or something that wouldn't directly impact my degree or my level of learning on my degree, I would take it as an online. But if it's something that I needed to learn for my future, not for the grade, not for anything else, but it was something directly tied to my major and I needed to learn it very, very well, then face-to-face was definitely my go-to class because that's where, like you said, I can ask the questions. I had a better connection with the professor. They can see my facial cues if I am struggling and whatnot. So that's what I tended to go towards when I was making that decision.
That makes sense.
Well, that'll do it for today's episode. The next 2 weeks, I'm super stoked about it, especially the one in 2 weeks, because we're going to be talking about how to get the most out of your college experience. The first one, we're going to be looking at how to get the most out of your college experience from an academic side. But then the one I'm really looking forward to is the one right after that. And that is just more or less how to have fun in college, the fun side of college, the extracurriculars, the things that most of us think about when we go to college or when we get into college, especially if we're going to college in a different town as our parents. But as always, please drop us a line on a website, Twitter, Instagram. Let us know your success stories. Again, we'd love to hear your success stories. We may even give you a shout out on the show. But until next time, Jason, you got anything?
No, y'all just get us those questions and we'll address them.
Awesome. Well, we'll see you next time. Goodbye.
Take care.
Thanks for listening to the Reschool'd Podcast. Be sure to head over to reschool'd.com for news and other information on things we're getting into.